As a technology company, we at TrendMicro, we develop technology to protect multiple layers of a company's organization and network, data center, endpoint, etc. But one thing that motivates me to work in the cybersecurity field is the human element. So what I mean by that is it's not just about securing the cloud applications or cloud infrastructure of a financial service company. The human element to it is that we're safeguarding your financial information, my financial information, our neighbors, our friends' financial information, and so on. Likewise, at a hospital, it's not just about protecting the hospital infrastructure. It's ensuring that surgeries are not canceled or postponed because of a ransomware attack. So whenever you think of security, if you're in the security field or if you're a developer, always think about the human element to security. Now, onto a theme, securing cloud DevOps. You can run, but you can't hide security. Time flies, doesn't it? Especially in this fast-paced world that we're living in. Technology's changing at the speed of light, and that's really putting pressure on the development teams to build fast and ship fast. And that's the whole, one of the benefits, of course, to the DevOps model, to building cloud native applications. It gives you that agility and speed to update your web applications and APIs and so forth faster and faster. And we see the need for that, right? Competition is fierce. One day you could build a feature, your competition has it a week later, and then a few months later, that feature becomes obsolete. So really, more and more organizations today are taking on this DevOps model for application development and doing so in the cloud. But what about security? What about security? So like we mentioned before, businesses are looking to optimize and accelerate the application development lifecycle and their deployment in public clouds. And we're seeing this more and more in Canada as well. They're also leveraging new technologies and platforms. So a recent survey by analyst firm ESG shows that 75% of businesses have deployed containers into production, and 35% are already on their cloud native journey using serverless functions extensively. And we're actually in talks with a major Canadian company today that is on this journey. In fact, they have very few managed instances or VMs in the cloud today. Their applications are running it using container services, and now they're just on the cusps of moving some of those applications using serverless services in cloud service providers. So this is more and more a reality today. And with the expanding set of cloud infrastructure services, if you look at this chart for AWS, just about 7 years ago, not only do they provide the infrastructure, the compute services and storage, so on and so forth, they also provide customers with services to be able to deploy faster and be more agile. And we see this chart from 2013, they had 25 services, to 2019, over 165 services. And I just learned a few weeks ago that AWS now has over 200 cloud services that customers can leverage. So with the expanding set of cloud services, there's also steep learning curves for developers. And keeping in mind that speed is very important to build fast and ship fast. Even though there are best practices that AWS and Microsoft and Google provide, sometimes those best practices get missed. And that leads to misconfiguration in the infrastructure, which also can lead to risk, cyber risk. And we see examples. You could even do a quick Google search on misconfiguration of cloud infrastructure and applications, and you'll see names such as Uber, Time Warner, CenturyLink, Imperva. The list goes on. So misconfigurations is something that's really, really big for cloud today. And sometimes security is an afterthought that gets bolted on afterwards, which leaves gaps in protection. So here's a poll that we'd like to ask the audience for some of your thoughts. In your current role, when do you tend to hear about or be asked to work on security-related issues? Is it A, in production, B, while coding, C, in dev test, or D, whenever there is an active security audit, or when you hear of an audit coming? So we look forward to your responses to that question. When do you tend to hear about or be asked to work on security-related issues? Is it in production, while coding, in dev test, or whenever there is an active security audit, or when you hear of an audit coming? Or as Shlomo just posted, E, never happens. So let's see, A, B, C, or D? And we look forward to your response.
Yeah, we just launched the poll, so feel free to select your answer. We already have many people answered. All right, 5 seconds, 2, 3, 2, 1. WebEx asked for 10 more seconds. Oh.
Right?
Yeah, 6 seconds, 5 seconds. Okay, almost there. Okay. So what I can do is I can show the poll results. Can everyone see the poll results? Antoine, can you see that?
Yes, I do. So it seems for those that answered, it's quite scattered. It's quite scattered results, which is not surprising. You know, the last time we ran this poll, we actually saw the same results. There was no clear winner. Maybe perhaps the in-dev test a little bit, but it does seem scattered. So in production, you hear about it, while coding, okay, that's good. Dev test, or whenever there's an incident. So it's quite scattered. Okay, thank you for your sharing. Now we're going to go on to the next heading, securing cloud DevOps. So we're going to look at some areas here. So security issues of libraries, OS distributions in cloud and source code repositories. We're going to look at protection at runtime. Is there a difference between applications and containers? And then security considerations for microservices and infrastructure as code. And then we'll look at some other vulnerability issues as well. So security issues of libraries, OS distributions in cloud and source code repositories. When building an application, many tend to be dependent on open source software. And when a developer is opening a new project, sometimes you wait for the node to pull down your dependencies, and then those software can pull more downstream dependencies. So what you're left with is a software that started off with 50,000 lines of code has now ballooned to 500,000 lines of code. So understanding the makeup of your software becomes difficult. And when you're pulling down a package and you see that it's using a very recent tag, does that you automatically assume that that's the most secure package? So having the right information is key. So the ability to identify known vulnerabilities is essential while you're developing, as well as the ability to monitor it in the future. Is the more recent package better? We need to be able to measure these dependencies and the risks of the dependencies. So there are tools that developers can use that does container scanning pre-runtime, so that before you push the application to production, you can actually use tools that will check for vulnerabilities, including open source vulnerabilities, malware, see if there were any secret keys that was stored in your image. And you're able to do that scan so that you can ship your application securely. That's the key behind this. Now, protection at runtime. Is there a difference between apps and containers? The definition of applications is changing. So in the advent of cloud, you would put an application on a VM or an EC2 instance where you would manage that operating system. But now it's shifting, it's changing. Now an application can reside in a pod on containers to totally unmanaged infrastructure where you are in a server using serverless services. So when you're thinking about protection at runtime, the security must fit no matter where the application lives. So for example, the usual one, if you're managing the infrastructure, so if you're managing the VM or the EC2 instance, you can protect it with host-based security. But there's also the concept of security as code. So when you have a serverless application, don't make the mistake of assuming that all the security of that is taken care of simply because the cloud service provider is managing the underlying infrastructure. In fact, the reality is, even if you're using serverless services, the customer is responsible to protect their own application and data. So one suggestion is to use security as code. This is also called runtime application self-protection. As the name suggests, the integrated security solution, where the application will protect itself from web threats, as well as malware. So for example, you might be building a serverless web application that processes application forms, credit forms or mortgages, etc., where you're allowing your customers to upload those files to your application. Having a runtime application self-protection or security as code will enable you to protect against advanced threats uploaded to your web application, as well as from attacks of your typical OWASP threats as well. Cross-site scripting, SQL injection, et cetera, et cetera. And the advantages for the developer. What are the advantages for the developer of using security as code? Is that once a threat is identified for that web application, you're able to action it by viewing the lines of code where that vulnerability is occurring. So you can take that information and correct your application to mitigate that risk in the future. So some security considerations for microservices and infrastructure as code. So one of the advantages of cloud deployments and cloud infrastructure is the ability to automate the provisioning of the infrastructure, to run scripts and templates, to be able to spin up your services, to enable roles, etc. These templates or infrastructure as code can be challenging for security as well. Perhaps what you've templated has been misconfigured. So how can we mitigate that? Obviously, there's advantages to using the template to be able to quickly spin up your environments across multiple accounts. But how can we ensure that what's in that template is properly configured? Well, again, there are tools, security tools, and services out there that check for misconfigurations in your templates. They're called Cloud Security Posture Management tools and services. So using these kinds of services, again, will help you to ensure that whatever template you're using, that the best practices are fully in place. So that'll help you to minimize those mistakes or human errors. As well, in thinking about the infrastructure as a whole, there may be misconfigurations. So again, Cloud Security Posture Management will also help you to meet compliance and prove compliance to your auditors, especially if you're under a certain regulatory compliance that you need to meet. So services like that will help ensure compliance. And here's some security you can try today. At TrendMicro, we have the ability to shift left. It's a DevOps tool for DevOps to scan container images and registry scanning to find and fix vulnerabilities. Services to auto-detect and auto-correct cloud misconfigurations and improve regulatory compliance, as well as application security or security as code for protecting serverless applications and more.